But I think in today's world, where we're so bombarded with stimuli all the time, actually, it's even more powerful to experience this music on its own
Hmm.
and to go into a hall. And the symphony hall, it's one of so few spaces left in our world where one goes and just focuses on one thing. And we just focus on the music, but in a communal way.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Krenz from Music City Review, and today I'm speaking with Lidiya Yankovskaya, who will be visiting the Nashville Symphony in the end of September, the September 28th and 29th. So, Lydia, nice to speak with you today.
So great to meet you, and thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah. Have you ever been to Nashville before?
I have once, and actually, a long time ago, I conducted the Nashville Symphony very briefly. I was part of a preview sponsored by the League of American Orchestras, where they give opportunities to conductors early in their careers in a sort of showcase. So I had an opportunity to conduct some Tchaikovsky and some music by Kip Winger, who is a
Yeah.
Nashville-based composer and a performer, which was really fantastic. And I loved the orchestra then, and I love the hall, and I love the culture, the musical culture of Nashville. So I'm really looking forward to coming back.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I remember that concert a couple of years back. So great to have you back. For a situation like this where you're coming back to an orchestra you've already been to, even with that just for a few minutes, how when you're preparing your scores, what is it like coming back to an orchestra you've already worked with before?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I feel like that was in a very different kind of time in my career when I approached music making, also in a different place. And a preview situation is very different from coming in and working with an orchestra really intensively for a week. Also, the repertoire I'm doing this time around is quite different in many ways. And there's been so much turnaround and change within the orchestra, especially during the pandemic. Most arts institutions have experienced not just a change in personnel, but also a change in how people perform after the pandemic. So in a way, it's like doing it from scratch in a brand new place. The one big advantage is that I know the hall,
Hmm.
and that always makes a huge difference because the hall, the space, affects not only how you as the conductor approach the work and how the audience experiences it, but also how the orchestra plays. When the orchestra is constantly rehearsing in that hall, the orchestra shapes what the music is, but also the hall shapes how the orchestra performs the music. And I absolutely love that space. Also, early in my career, my time was spent working with the Boston Symphony, with whom I chorus mastered. Also, straight out of college, I sang in the chorus, and I was really kind of in that space and grew up on the music of that institution. And of course, the Nashville Hall has so much in common with Symphony Hall in Boston, but actually is better in some ways because Symphony Hall it's an older hall and has some limitations and it's quite wet. And the Nashville Hall, I think, takes all the best things from Boston, and it's so spectacular. It's one of my favorite orchestral spaces in this country.
Yeah, I didn't really realize growing up hearing the Nashville Symphony in their hall all the time how much of a treat it really was until I got to Boston, and I was so excited to hear the orchestra, and then I thought I kind of prefer the Nashville Hall, even though Symphony Hall is so
Yeah.
famous, but the Nashville Hall is great.
Well, it
Yeah.
was highly influenced actually by Symphony Hall and its building, which is
Mhm.
fascinating. But with the use of modern technology to make certain things work better, and also just drying up the space just slightly, because Symphony Hall in Boston is an extremely wet space, and it's wonderful for certain repertoire, but there are other kinds of repertoire that's difficult to do in that space. And for instance, on this program, we have some work by Missy Mazzoli and Prokofiev, works that really require clarity,
Mhm.
and I think that was for me also a very exciting thing when programming for this orchestra and for this hall, because not only is it a top notch orchestra, but also there are opportunities to do repertoire both that requires a really rich sound and has a hall that can support that, but also that requires a great deal of clarity.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the programming. Will you talk me through how you structured this program? I assume you'd probably done most of these pieces before, but are any of them new to you?
The Prokofiev Violin Concerto I've never done actually, so that one's new to me. And Missy Mazzoli's Orpheus Undone, I've done a great deal of her work, but I haven't yet done this particular piece, and it's one
Okay.
that's been on my bucket list for a while. But it's of course always when you come up with repertoire, it's a combination of kind of what the orchestra has in their season, what are the things that I can bring to the orchestra, what are the things that they're also looking to do. And what I love about this program, and it's unusual to get an opportunity to do something like this, is that there are four pieces on the program, and all four are composers and works that I absolutely adore and feel really passionately about. Just some of my favorite things, hands down, to conduct, but also wildly different from one another,
Mhm.
while fitting together as a program. And it's so rare to be able to find that combination. And so I'm really excited for this program in particular this season.
Yeah, me as well. I think out of all the season coming up, it's one of the highlights for me looking over the music that you have prepared. You mentioned the Prokofiev, and I know you've worked with Simone Porter before.
Yeah.
Have I guess this piece is new to you and it's probably not new to her. So when you know the soloist and you're working with a new piece, how does that fit, fit into your study and how you think you're going to craft the rehearsal time?
Yeah, well, I love Prokofiev in general. I perform a lot of Prokofiev. He's one of my favorite composers, and we share a hometown. And I think that just his music speaks to me. And Simone and I worked together a couple of seasons ago, but on something very different, on the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. But I just love both her musicianship and her nuance, the kind of phrasing that she found in her playing. And I think those things transfer also really well to Prokofiev. So I can't wait to hear what she brings to this piece. But always with the soloist, it ends up being a collaboration. And the thing that's really exciting for me is I, of course, can build an idea of what I think the piece is in my head and how it should be performed in my mind. But then I get to meet the soloist, and usually people don't realize this actually, but usually the conductor and soloist meet for 30 minutes before the first rehearsal, and that's usually 2 days before the performance, and that's it. So I think our first performance is on Saturday, and I might not even see her actually until Friday morning. So Friday morning, I'll see her for 30 minutes, and then we jump into rehearsal. So it'll be really, it's always really exciting to see in that short meeting immediately, like, oh, what are all these ideas and interpretive thoughts that maybe I hadn't thought of, that the soloist brings to the equation, and to incorporate that into whatever you're doing.
Hmm.
So I love that collaborative aspect of it, especially with a soloist whose musicianship I admire so much.
Yeah, that's great. I love the collaboration as well, and I know opera is a big part of your career and background and everything. And in opera, collaboration is a big part of it with stage directors and lighting designers and everything. And I see the Wagner on this program as well. So can you talk to me a little bit about doing some Tristan and Isolde?
Yeah, and of course, the opera, there's so many moving elements and so many pieces and so many things as the conductor that you have to be aware of at the same time when you're conducting an opera, that it's very exciting, and there all kinds of things happen every performance, which is part of it. But also, I love taking especially repertoire like this that comes from opera into the symphonic sphere, because when suddenly you have a much shorter work with, or shorter concert, I should say, shorter performance, generally with uh, fewer elements that one has to worry about. It's just the orchestra. You can really focus in, and in a laser focused way, find all of those nuances and all of the specificity of just that music piece of music on its own, which also I think is a really marvelous experience for the audience, because when we think about Wagner's time, we didn't have television, we didn't have recorded music in the same way, we didn't have all of these other stimuli in our world. So for Wagner and his full, complete operas, it was all about getting people into a space and turning off the lights and having them just be fully immersed. But I think in today's world, where we're so bombarded with stimuli all the time, actually, it's even more powerful to experience this music on its own,
Hmm.
And to go into a hall, and the symphony hall, it's one of so few spaces left in our world where one goes and just focuses on one thing. And we just focus on the music, but in a communal way, not at home with your headphones on where it's just you, but communally with others, focused on one thing with the rest of the world shut off. And that's really special. And I think Wagner's music in particular lends itself very well to this, because it was kind of the opposite, in a sense, the opposite side of it, but the ultimate result is the same. Is how do we get people to communally focus in on something that's in the DNA of the music, and in particular of the Liebestod. And usually the Liebestod is performed together with the prelude. In fact, I don't know if others have done it this way, unless it's been with singer as part of a larger program. I've never heard of others doing it this way. It's possible others have, but usually you have the prelude immediately followed by the Liebestod. And the Tristan prelude is quite famous. It's studied in musicology classes. But for me, actually, the Liebestod is in many ways the more effective part of it. And even when you look at it over the course of the opera, the prelude starts the opera. It's the overture in a sense. And then the Liebestod is the very end of the opera. And the prelude, it's a series of questions, really. It's a series of unanswered questions. But the Liebestod is a kind of wrapping up of something. It is yearning personified and then resolving over the course of the piece, which I don't know exactly how long it is, but maybe about 10 minutes. These 10 minutes of just waiting and waiting and waiting until you reach this resolution at the end, which I think is so powerful. And I actually, and I perform it regularly with the prelude, but I think when the two are together, somehow the Liebestod, the impact of that gets diminished to some extent. So I'm really excited to perform it on its own. This is the first time I've done it on its own, it is symphonically, and I think I really look forward to seeing what that experience is like for the audience, because to me it also encompasses one of the things I love most about Wagner's music, and it's this ability to carry a phrase for an infinite amount of time, seemingly infinite amount of
Yeah.
time. And sometimes you can sit for an hour and feel like no time has passed with Wagner if it's performed well, if his music is performed well, and if the everything it falls into place the way it's supposed to because of the length of the phrases. And I think that that'll be very exciting and very different from Dvorak, which will come right after it on the program.
Yeah, I'm happy you mentioned that because most times I've ever heard Wagner in concert perform like that is with the prelude preceding it. And I feel it almost does a disservice to the work just because you're right, the prelude is so overwhelming almost. And then to skip the middle 3 hours and go straight to the end seems like we're really trying to condense down Wagner when it wasn't intended to be that way. He was
And
really,
they're also so different.
yeah.
They're such different. I mean, they're both Wagner, and yes, they share and they come from the same opera, but I think they're performed together because it's a practicality. It's two pieces that work well symphonically, that together create this nice 20-minute or so section of the concert.
Mhm.
But really, I'm really excited to just do the Liebestod on its own. Also, I think if I'm not wrong, I think we have an intermission right before it, and it just kind of comes out of nothing and then just grows and grows and grows. And that coming out of nothing, I think, is again more exciting when it's on its own terms than a prelude. Prelude ends, it moves immediately into the Liebestod.
Mhm. Yeah, and you mentioned the Dvorak following that. I know Slavic masterpieces are something that you are really passionate as well, and I'm happy to see Dvorak 7 on there because I feel like between you and me, I like 7 and 8 much better than 9. So I'm really happy to hear 7. What goes in your thought process about picking 7 over any of the other ones, or how do you prepare this?
Yeah, I love Dvorak's Seventh Symphony, and I think to me it always feels like it's the most personal of his symphonies. The eighth has a beautiful optimism kind of about it. Those three have performed the most, seven, eight, nine. The ninth is, I think, has become so iconic and well known, and it's a really masterful work. But I think the fact that it's so iconic also, in a way, kind of feeds into in some ways almost makes it less effective and makes it a little bit harder, but also it's not as nuanced and not as intimate. The seventh has all of these really intimate moments and very vulnerable. Maybe vulnerable is a better word than intimate. Really vulnerable moments. It was written at a time when Dvorak was in a more by the time the ninth was written, he was really an established composer. I think by the seventh, he was in a sense, but he was also in a more difficult time in his life, both personally and professionally, also politically. There were all kinds of things happening, and he felt very strongly about his own Czech identity, and he constantly felt under pressure. Other things aside, for the benefit, so to speak, of his own career, he was being pressured to create works that were more Germanic per se, or somehow less Czech, specifically Czech. And he went against that, but also went against that not in a way of protesting or proving a point, but in just being authentic to himself. And I think that's what makes this piece so special, that he kept getting pressure to write a certain way. And he didn't push against that and say, oh, I'm going to write in this other way, which also wouldn't have been authentic. Neither of those is, but rather took the time to really look within himself. And I think it's in the Seventh Symphony that we really see Dvorak as a composer and as a human in this most authentic way.
Yeah, I think that's great. I really like everything you said about all of these pieces, and I'm really a big fan of well-crafted programs because I think that, like you spoke about with the Wagner, of creating this experience for the audience and for the orchestra is a very important thing. And so I love that this program, it seems that it really reflects your different sides of your musical heritage and the stuff that you're very passionate about. So I'm very much looking forward to your concerts at the end of September. And they're September 28th and 29th for anyone watching. And thank you very much for speaking with me today.
Well, thank you so much, Daniel. And I'm so looking forward to this program, and I hope to see you there.
Perfect. Thank you. All
Thank
right.
you.